was a phenomenal year for the genre as a whole. And I've certainly got my thoughts. It was very tough making a decision for me because I had 7 or 8 albums that I could have picked. But Jason, I'm going to kick this over to you. What was your album of the year in progressive metal
for
category?
me, it wasn't really close. And ADD moment, but this is how usually we do things. You know, it's funny that on the first ever episode of the show, we reviewed The Astonishing. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because maybe some of you have nominated it or not. I don't know. But to me, the one thing that we mentioned, Biv, when we did the review, and I don't know what Lacey's thoughts are on this, but the one thing that I had a concern on when listening to The Astonishing from Dream Theater, now that we're talking progressive metal, is would it withstand the test of time? Yes, we're listening to it now. It's a new release, and it's this whole, 2-album, concept album, essentially. And in person and in concert, it's killer. But would the album itself withstand the test of time? And for me, the more the year went on, February, March, April, May, June, the less and less I listened to it, to where it's been months since I have. Whereas that's not the case with the progressive metal album of the year, at least according to me here on According to Metal, and that is a band that I will say that I'm ashamed to say I wrote off as a band that I'm just never going to get into, a band that I thought I don't really understand what the big deal is. Why do everybody like these guys? I don't really get it. And then I sort of got it. And not only did I listen to it and like it a lot when it came out, in fact, I gave it a 9 out of 10 when we reviewed it, but unlike The Astonishing, at least to me, this album has withstood the test of time even more so, to where I listen to this album as much as, if not more so, than I did when I reviewed the darn thing 6-7 months ago, however long it was. And that is Theories of Flight by Fates Warning. Just an album that, this is a band who's been around forever, a band I could never get into and I couldn't quite understand why. Starting from the Rooftops, which is a killer way to start the album off if you give it time, because it builds, but then the song takes off and is great. 7 Stars is awesome. White Flag, Ghosts of Home, Like Stars, Our Eyes Now See. I mean, just, there's 5 tracks there that I could listen to and have listened to probably once a week-ish. Maybe once every other week as I'm driving around in my car, working and doing stuff like that. I mean, it's just great music, just music quality overall. The band's incredible. Ray Alder, of course, we've knocked 100 times, saying his voice doesn't fit in Redemption. It fits perfectly with Fates Warning. Just a great album. I can't recommend it enough. If you're a prog metal fan, or if you're like me, and just for some reason, maybe you're just into Dream Theater and some other progressive metal bands, and you've never understood what the big deal is about Fates Warning. Well, I was with you up until this album and up until this year, so I'm proud to say that by far and away, it wasn't even close for me. Theories of Flight by Fates Warning was my progressive metal album of the year. So, ladies first. So, Biv, go ahead. No, I'm just kidding. Lacey. Prog Metal. I know I could speak for, I know Biv already said it. Biv's the guy who turned me on to progressive metal. It's now what I consider my favorite genre of metal, and I know that's more where you are as well. So this should be a real interesting category to discuss. So, Lacey, if there's anybody who's listened to a lot of prog metal this year, it's you. So who made the cut? Who's the best for you?
Yeah, well, I will say prog was definitely my top-heavy group or category. I have a lot of albums there that I had to narrow down. And like Biv, I've been a fan of progressive metal probably since, I guess, the early 90s. And so, I've been following it for a long time. So I had a lot of albums to rank, and a lot of them, it was close. It was a real close call for me. There were a lot of runners-up that I could have mentioned. But I finally narrowed it down that I think my prog album of the year is Mirath's Legacy.
Oh, nice! Well done!
Thank you. Yeah, that was just one album I could not get out of my head all year. I mean, it was a 5 out of 5 on my review when I reviewed it. They're just knocking it out of the park. They just keep getting better and better in every album. they're just kind of skyrocketing, I think, in popularity. And I like their own particular brand of metal. I mean, I guess you call it prog, because they call themselves Oriental metal or Tunisian metal or whatever you want to call them. But I really like the fact that they put their own stamp on the metal from their home country, from their music traditions and things like that. So it makes it really interesting. And they just keep sounding better every year. So, that's my pick for prog.
Well, good choice. Now, what was it, Lance? Jason, you may recall. What was it that Lance called their sound? He said they called themselves Oriental metal, but he said they to him they were more of like a groove funk metal.
I think he said Middle Eastern groove metal or something.
Yeah, and I think that's a good fit.
That's a good description.
So, I just counted actually, and I have 7 that I considered. 7 albums that I considered for the prog metal category. For the album of the year, and Legacy by Meredith was one of them. They didn't end up being my choice, but they certainly were in my top 7. And I'm just going to kind of run through what the other 6 are, just so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. Imminent Sonic Destruction's Triumphia. I don't think enough people have heard that. I think it's a phenomenal CD. Fate's Warning, Theories of Flight. So I was right there with you, Jason. Avantasia's Ghost Lights, I considered. Dante, When We Were Beautiful, which, I just think is, Jason, you and I had talked about the opening track on that album, that, if you were going to introduce someone to progressive metal for the first time, that would be the song that you would kind of feed them.
Yeah.
And so I guess I felt that way about 90% of the album, that it was such a, I don't know any progressive metal fan that would listen to that and go, oh, this is garbage. I think that it would be very appealing to many. And then Evergraze, The Storm Within. That might be the best album they've ever done. But my final choice, and I had it down between Dante and my choice for prog metal album of the year, Sunburst, Fragments of Creation.
Mm-hmm.
What a phenomenal CD. The vocals on that are very Camelot-like. But if you're into Camelot or Roy Khan, either one, this might be a CD for you to check out. But I think the musicianship was great. They did a great job of changing tempo. The song gets stuck in your head. And, I think you referred to it, Lacey, as playability. And to me, I call it accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing. We're just using different terms. But totally accessible.
Yeah. And Sunburst is on my list, too.
Very good. So I think we were right there on probably many picks.
Mm-hmm.
But, so that was my prog metal album of the year.
Well, there you go. Biv with Sunburst. Lacey with Mirath, another great choice. And, of course, Fate's Warning, my friends. Check them out. Prog Metal. That's it. Now we're moving on to the next category. Another category. This one is gonna flow you. The traditional metal album of the year. So like I said, we were about to present the award for the best traditional metal album, at least according to us here on the According to Metal podcast. Of course, Biv, Lacey, and myself, and we're talking traditional metal. Good old-fashioned, just heavy metal. I don't have a genre to put them in. They don't have a genre to put them in. Maybe we don't put them in any genre, and we just say, look, this is good stuff. So I know mine, again, similar to the last review. To me, it was kind of a no-brainer. That's just my opinion. Seems like Biv and Lacey are more torn. For me, I was just like, boom. Clearly, this is who it is. But I don't know. We'll see what Biv has in store for us. Biv, traditional metal, what you got?
Well, what a great year for, the big, well-known bands like Megadeth and Anthrax and We had talked about, well, I think you and I, Jason, I talked about, in the last 15, 16 months, we've seen Slayer, we've seen all the heavy hitters come out with their stuff, but and while all those were great, there were two albums that probably didn't get the attention they deserved. And that is Blaze Bayley's Infinite Entanglement, which is a phenomenal CD. I've listened to it on a very regular basis ever since it's come out. In fact, I even own the CD. And there's not many CDs that I, will just run out and buy, but I bought that one. And Holy Grail's Times of Pride and Peril, Ooh. Which I gave a perfect score.
Oh, this is going to be interesting, folks.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I flip-flopped on this more than Donald Trump on the Mexican wall. So I got to tell you, though, I ended up going with Holy Grail, Times of Pride and Peril.
Wow, okay.
By a razor-thin margin over Blaze Bayley. But I also did consider Megadeth and Anthrax as well.
So what is it that made Holy Grail stand out for you over Blaze Bayley? Because they're very different.
They are very different. I guess because I felt like Holy Grail encompassed, appealed to such a wider array of potential metal fans. Whereas Blaze Bayley has a very distinct voice. And you could almost call that progressive metal. And in fact, there are tracks on that I would call progressive metal. But I just think if you were going to introduce someone to the giant genre of metal, and you were to put on Holy Grail, you wouldn't scare anybody off at all. But you would introduce them to enough of the core elements of metal. The rhythms, the galloping, choruses at times. I guess it encompasses everything to me that a good metal album should be. And so for that reason, I gave it just the narrowest of margins over Blaze Bayley.
Wow. Well, that was your first perfect album of the year, was Holy Grail. And, of course, we already mentioned earlier that my first perfect album was a SAR from Almanac. So at least two albums that we can say that we said, yeah, flawless, ended up being an album of the year for us. So they withstood at least the test of time from when we did the review to where we still think about them now, which is you think they're pretty kick-ass. So that's good to hear. Well, yeah, I'm glad. I actually, I feel between the two, just my opinion, that I would definitely lean more towards Holy Grail myself. So good call, Biv. What say you, Lacey?
All right. Well, Megadeth was a consideration also for me. But I actually decided to go with a fellow Greek band, and I chose Inner Wish for my metal album of the year.
Wow.
Nice choice.
Yeah. What's interesting, I took a listen to their album, and they've been around for, I guess, about 20 years. But I really became familiar with them, I guess, with this last album. And it's just a really good, solid metal album. There's no bad song on the album. They kind of just keep you hooked in. And it's just really good, straightforward, catchy metal. So they impressed me this year.
Wow. I didn't think that was something you would have said.
Really?
No, I wouldn't have guessed Inner Wish, even though I think that's not a bad call at all, in fact. For me, speaking of 2 decades, speaking of 20 years, the winner for traditional metal album of the year, at least, in my opinion, was a band that, on our first episode, Biv, we reviewed Dream Theater, we reviewed Avantasia, we reviewed Megadeth, but yet it was this album that was my favorite of the 4. And I never thought that going into those 4 reviews, it would have been the one I would have liked and listened to the most. Not only then, but after that. You want to take a guess as to who that may be, Biv?
I don't remember who the 4th band was. I mean, that was a year ago. So
Primal Fear, my friend.
Excellent album.
Rule Breaker is an incredibly good album. If you like Judas Priest, or if you simply feel that if Judas Priest would write new material that I thought was actually good, because recently the last couple of albums, at least in my opinion, are decent at best, this is what you would get, and this is Primal Fear. It is straight out heavy metal, no frills, no